This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open source Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code DevChat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code DevChat at Sentry.io. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel, we have Eric Berry.
Hey!
Dave Kimura.
Hey, everyone.
Nate Hopkins.
Hello.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that's Vlad Dementiev.
Yeah, right. Hi, everyone.
Do you want to introduce yourself real quick for folks who don't know who you are?
Sure. So my name is Vladimir, but yeah, most people call me Vlad. And it's much easier. I'm working for a company called Evil Martians, and I'm a backend developer officially. I'm the team lead. But nowadays, I'm actually doing a lot of front-end stuff and other kind of work. I've been writing Ruby since, I guess, 2014, so for 4 years and a half, something. Mm-hmm. And before that, I was an ActionScript developer, PHP developer, JavaScript developer, Erlang developer, and many other things, actually. And right now, I'm mostly Ruby, Golang, and front-end guy.
ActionScript, you don't hear that thrown around too much anymore.
That's a better version of JavaScript, you know.
So,
the other people I've heard say that, I think, have brain damage.
So when several years ago, I was playing around with WebSockets using the Face server and tied it into my Ruby on Rails applications, and that worked really good. And then at one point, Rails released Action Cable, and that was basically built-in WebSockets into the Rails framework. And so I played around with it, and I'm actually using that in production on a few of my applications. And everything seems to be working great and fine. And then came along AnyCable, which is and correct me if I'm wrong, Vlad, a drop-in replacement for the Action Cable engine. So you essentially have the same API or very similar Action Cable API within your Rails application, but then the actual underlying engine would be different. It would be AnyCable, and it is a WebSocket engine, and it's able to push out the publish and subscribes for your WebSocket connections.
Yeah, something like that, but I'd like to call it not engine because we can confuse with Rails engines because it's not true. But instead I call it a server, a different server implementation for Action Cable because we still use most of the code base from Action Cable. So it's channels framework, so all the business logic stuff. But we do not use anything related to WebSockets and connections. And the idea of AnyCable is to extract this part, this low-level stuff, from Ruby to somewhere else and somehow connect to each other. So that's not a replacement for Action Cable. That's kind of enhancement.
Okay.
The goal is not to replace Action Cable. We love Action Cable and we use it. But the goal is to make it more performant, more scalable.
Yeah, and reading the blog post on Evil Martins, it definitely has the numbers to prove the scalable and performance side of things, where now it's directly more in competition with some other different kinds of WebSocket servers. So if someone wanted to give AnyCable a shot, to use their current existing Action Cable setup, because right now on a lot of my applications within the Nginx server, I will simply just have a different location URL for the cable, like the I know Fusion Passenger has some setup guides and stuff for Nginx as well, where it'll still launch the Action Cable server. So if you wanted to take a normal run-of-the-mills Action Cable Ruby on Rails application setup, what steps would you really have to go through to convert that over to also use the AnyCable server?
Okay, there are a few steps. First, from the code perspective from your application, it's pretty simple. You just have to add a gem to your gem file. So suppose you're using Rails application, so that's going to be AnyCable Rails gem. And you have to specify how it's called, publish subscribe adapter for Action Cable, which is in your cable YAML file. And you should specify AnyCable adapter. And that's actually all you have to do from the code perspective. So you configure your, say, production environment for Action Cable to use AnyCable adapter. And yeah, that's, as you mentioned, you have to specify a separate URL for your client to connect to, because you're going to run a separate WebSocket server. And then the tricky part is from the infrastructure point of view, because you have to run not one Rails process, Rails server, but at least 3 different processes. So your usual Rails server for all the request response stuff, so your API, your web pages, whatever. And you need a WebSocket server, which is kind of separate kind of proxy. It's like just like a Nginx, but for WebSockets, with a little bit of logic for Action Cable. And there are some choices, but actually everyone use a Golang version of AnyCable WebSocket server called AnyCable Go, because it's much easier to use. Just download the binary and launch. That's it. And the third process is the part which connects these 2 applications, Rails and Golang applications, to each other. It's RPC server built on top of gRPC framework. And it should be run as a separate process, because it's actually an HTTP server, but an HTTP2 server, which accepts RPC calls from WebSocket server. So yeah, the tricky part is that you have 3 processes in your environment, not one with Action Cable. Everything else stays the same. So you continue using your Action Cable channels code and everything else.
So this sounds a little bit complicated and a little bit of work, right? So when we're looking at this, when am I going to look at this and go, because right now I'm going, okay, I have a tiny app. Is it worth it? So when does it become worth it to go through all
definitely not for the tiny app. And so the idea of AnyCable is to be a replacement, drop-in replacement at the time you need it. So it's compatible with Action Cable mostly. There are some incompatibilities, but for most cases it's compatible. And you can start with Action Cable. And if you hit the limit, so some kind of resources limit, connections limit, whatever, if you need these high-load abilities, you can replace it with AnyCable. And that means that you don't have to start your cable project with AnyCable from scratch. That doesn't make sense, because it will make your setup more complicated. But if you hit this threshold of a large number of connections or messages passing, so you probably can spend some time for infrastructure configuration a little bit more than with Action Cable.
And that's what I love about AnyCable, is that you don't need it right away. You use it when it makes sense. And it's a drop-in replacement or drop-in adapter difference. And to me, that's really the way to go. Because as you already said, the infrastructure is more complicated. And when you're just trying to get something off the ground, overcomplicating your infrastructure with something like AnyCable when there's not really a need, or adding in something like React.js into your application from the get-go, it doesn't make sense. Sorry, I just had a hate on React a bit there. But.
Yeah, right. That's actually the idea. So the story began when I first heard about Action Cable at the RailsConf 2015. I was already working on something like that, but more low level, with Erlang server and raw TCP-based RPC protocol. Now it's creepy stuff. And when I saw Action Cable, I realized, I like that Ruby part of it. So it's really Rails' way to handle WebSocket connections, to treat them as kind of real actors in your Ruby application. And I decided to build something on top of what I already have in my previous project and make it scalable, because I never believed in Ruby for high load concurrent applications. So I started to working on Anycable.
Cool. So just to give some metrics on one of my applications, I don't have the number of concurrent WebSocket connections, but over the course of a 24-hour period, we handle 400,000 push events from Action Cable. And this is on a relatively small, sub 8 gigabytes of RAM machine. So it's able to handle quite a bit of workload without having to switch over to Anycable. But if that were to increase beyond our limits without upgrading or scaling vertically with our servers, we would have to go to some alternative like Anycable.
Yeah, you said you had a large number of pushes, but that's not the bottleneck, I think. The question is how many connections actually you have and how long-lived are they? So that's the question.
Yeah,
because the messages throughput could affect your memory usage, for example. It depends on the message itself, so the size of payloads. So, some people use Action Cable to broadcast something like TurboLink's templates update, like like Things live view feature. Some people use Action Cable to transmit HTML partials. And they're pretty large. And rebroadcasting these kind of large messages could consume a lot of unnecessary memory in your Ruby process due to some implementation, bottlenecks in Action Cable, actually.
What kind of implementation bottlenecks?
There is one thing I discovered about a year ago, maybe two, that Action Cable, so it used JSON by default to encode in your messages. In theory, it's possible to use other coders. At least there is some support for that, but I guess nobody uses. And the thing is that every message is encoded and decoded for every client, even if we don't need it. And that produce a lot of intermediate temporary objects during the broadcast, which could produce memory bloat of your Ruby process. And that's easy to fix, and actually I did pull requests years ago, like with every Action Cable pull requests, to fix this, to not do double encoding for each message. And with this pull request, my benchmarks, my high-load benchmarks for WebSockets shows rather good results, much better than Action Cable as it is now. But it's still open and it hasn't been merged into master yet. But that's one of the problems. It's really an implementation kind of bottleneck in Action Cable. It's round trip encoding of messages.
So from a practical perspective, if I decide to move a project to Anycable, sounds like there's some ops overhead that I'm going to have to deal with, but how much new code am I going to need to write and port to Go or Erlang or something like that? Do I have to write any of that?
No, in most cases, you don't have to rewrite anything. So as I said, most of Action Cable features are supported by Anycable out of the box. So we make your Action Cable code think that it's working with real sockets, but actually it's going to work with some kind of mock sockets from Anycable. That's kind of this is Ruby's duck typing feature, which we're heavily using here. So from Action Cable framework point of view, it thinks that it's working with real sockets, but it's not actually. So you don't have to change your code base. There are some incompatibilities. So we do not support some things that you can do with Ruby's Action Cable. So for example, in Ruby, as an Action Cable, you deal with persistent objects. So once you initialize your connection, it lives until the client is disconnected. That means that you can use, for example, instance variables to store some data in your channels, in your connection, and operate with them during the life cycle of your connection, which is not possible with Anycable because Anycable doesn't persist your connection objects. Every time you need to do something within your socket, we just create a temporary object, perform operation, and just free it. So there is one caveat of Anycable. If you use something like that in your channels, then you probably had to rewrite it a little bit. And there is a good article, I think I'll provide a link at the end to the episode, called From Action to Any, not by me or anyone on our team actually, but from one user of Anycable, which describes some hidden pitfalls and caveats when migrating from ActionCable to Anycable. That was a year ago, maybe a little bit more. Now the situation a little bit better, but there's still some incompatibilities. Hopefully at RubyConf, announced a new version of Anycable, Ruby parts, Ruby gems, and we added compatibility checks support. So if you have some code which is not supported by Anycable, you either could use Rubacop-based cops to statically analyze your code and detect these potential problems, or add runtime checks to raise an exception if you're going to use something which is not supported by Anycable. So it's much easier to migrate to Anycable right now than a year ago, for example.
Oh,
that's awesome. What's uptake been like with Anycable in terms of adoption? How many users are coming to Anycable?
Well, I don't have any statistics. We have a Gitter channel, and there are some people using Anycable there. I met some people at conferences who told me, "Oh, we use an Anycable; it's cool." But I don't have any official statistics. We use it, Evil Martians, right now in 2 projects, and so yeah, we're using it. I know some people who use it, but do not have numbers, unfortunately. I will be glad to know these numbers, actually, but no idea.
So right now, out of the box with Rails, ActionCable kind of runs in process with your web server. So it's really easy from an ops perspective. It's almost something you don't need to think about. But if you get to the point where you are considering, because Rails allows you to take ActionCable and deploy it separately, is that the time to consider Anycable? Like if you've scaled to the point where vertically scaling the web servers with things running with ActionCable running in process doesn't seem like a viable option. So now you're considering deploying on a separate deployment for ActionCable. Is that the time to reach for Anycable?
Yeah, that could be a good point because you have to invest in infrastructure. So it's better to do that once and forget about any other improvements for a long time with Anycable than to do this intermediate step of extracting ActionCable process. Yeah, that's actually a good point where you should consider Anycable as a replacement. And the good thing, for example, talking about deployment, nowadays there are plenty of ways you can deploy your application. And the simplest one, Heroku, which is actually for Anycable is the most trickiest because Heroku doesn't support HTTP2 between dynos. So you should do something different. And we do have an official way, and actually people use Anycable in production on Heroku, but that involves a separate copy of your application which runs a WebSocket server along with RPC server under the same dyno, and a separate application for your Rails app. It's a little bit tricky, but that's actually easier than it could look like. So deploying Anycable on Heroku is proved to be, working solution. We at Evil Martians, we using Kubernetes and Helm charts for that, and it's easy. But I don't think we published our Helm configurations for Anycable yet. That probably, again, pending pull request to Helm chart repo with Anycable formula. Or how was they called it? I don't know.
So how was the initial handshake time with Anycable? Because I know whenever I spin up a ActionCable Rails application, just your standard one, there's a slight delay in when it actually upgrades the request to a WebSocket and then makes that connection, the handshaking with all the different channels. So is there any difference with Anycable in that sense?
With Anycable, you first connect to WebSocket server, which is, say, Golang server, and the WebSocket handshake itself is pretty fast. And it's much faster than with Ruby because the concurrency is better, of course, for example, in Golang server. Then, since our architecture involves RPC calls, we have to call Ruby RPC server to authenticate the connection. And that was my first kind of fear when I started working on Anycable. Wouldn't this be a bottleneck, this RPC connection? Mm-hmm. And it turned out that gRPC, even its standard implementation provided by Google, it's really fast. And I have some numbers for number of requests per second you can achieve with RPC server. And it's for any cable, it's about 2,000 requests per second. You can make 2,000 RPC calls per second between WebSocket server and Ruby server. That's for any cable. So with some overhead of creating connection objects and whatever. So it's pretty much. So I don't think you. So when do you need that amount of calls per second? When you have probably dozens of thousands connections initiating at a time. But that's not that's the time then you probably have to scale your any cable infrastructure and add some more players into the game. So load balancers for WebSockets, for RPCs, whatever. That could be more complicated actually with any cable, but there are some solutions for that. So we're talking about Handshake. So I have some benchmarks not for handshakes actually. I don't have them. I only tried them once years ago. But now I have some broadcasting time benchmarks, and they show that the time it takes clients to connect to any cable and send a message and receive back, and it's much less than with action cable, even if servers are running on different machines. But yeah, there could be bottlenecks. So if you deploy your RPC server and WebSocket server in different machines, and depends on network between them, so that could be a problem. But you can deploy them on the same machine, and that's going to be blazingly fast.
Cool.
Sorry, just to mention, actually, there is some work in progress for this kind of scenarios when you can avoid calling RPCs, but instead making our business logic within a WebSocket server, so to eliminate RPC. And for that, I'm currently playing with this experimental solution based on top of mRuby, embedded Ruby version. It's kind of tiny Ruby. And it's possible to embed Ruby into Golang, for example. And the idea is what we use. So the idea is to get rid of most of RPC calls to make any cable much more faster. And the idea is to move the code from Ruby process, kind of transfer it to Golang process, compile it into an mRuby function, and call within Golang process instead of calling RPC every time. But that could, increase the number of actions per second about 10 times more. So that's currently very experimental. No one uses yet.
Cool.
So can you define a couple of terms for me? Because we keep hearing concurrency and real time. And I swear every time I talk to somebody different about this, they think of it a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's start with what is real time? What are we talking about real time? How it's different from usual way our clients and servers communicate. So usually we compare real-time communication to request-response communication. So how our clients consume our REST APIs, GraphQL APIs, whatever. And the difference is that in request-response, we have the client should initiate a request, so to get some data from server. So server cannot send data to client without the client initiating it. So it's like a table tennis ping pong game when you hit the ball as a client and the server responds you with a response and responds you back with some data. And from backend perspective, from our server perspective, when we deal with request response, we actually dealing with a limited number of clients at a time. So we have a limited number of requests in active state in our web server, and there is usually some kind of queue where other requests are waiting for their turn. So just first in, first served queue. And the difference with real-time applications, and the basic example of real-time application is a chat application, messaging, some kind of stuff. So every real-time framework tutorial starts with building a new chat. And the difference here is that you can have many, many clients at a time, and you have to serve them all. But not at the same time, because you can do that for a large number of clients, but concurrently. The difference here is that you have a lot of clients, you have to serve them, so give them some data gives them some response. But you still have a limited number of kind of workers, servers, and they just move around every client and send data to each one when they pass in by. And this way, the clients are connected persistently. That means that once a request initiated, a WebSocket request, it's not disconnected until client decides to do so, or server decides to close the connection, and server can send the data to the client by its own without any initiation. So it's like this two client and server connected through a real cable or real tube with data flowing both directions independently, comparing to request response when you do not have this connection. You only have request send and response send back. And that's when we see the concurrency. So we have to deal with a lot of clients connecting to our application, our server, and we have to serve them all with some data. And when I say that we have a limited number of servers, it means that, well, usually our machine can execute at the same time the code only the number of the processes they have, CPUs. So that's a parallelism. So we can execute in parallel only. We're limited by the number of our cores, our virtual cores, or physical cores, doesn't matter. And the concurrency, that means that we can, well, actually not execute it at the same time, but we're trying to switch between our clients as fast as possible to make it looks like we are serving everyone at the same time. But from the micro perspective, it's not the same time, of course. And that's where we hit some Ruby's limitations. So because right now, parallelism in Ruby, well, it's only possible by forking processes, actually running a separate Ruby process from the master one, for example, like web servers do, such as Puma, if you use worker-based model. And concurrency is Ruby is kind of limited due to global interpreter lock, because you cannot execute Ruby code concurrently at the same time Ruby code. So it's limited by Ruby code execution. So that's how global interpreter lock works. But you still can execute call external kind of stuff like I/O handling, usual, and that's actually the case with WebSocket, because you're dealing with raw sockets, which is an example of I/O object, and you can execute. You can send or receive data from multiple sockets at a time, but you still have to handle all this stuff in your Ruby code, which is limited, and that's a place where we hit some kind of limitations of global interpreter lock. So I'm not sure it became clear. Sorry, maybe I made things complicated. Yeah.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot out there as far as the concurrency and parallelism limitations of Ruby. You know, it's something that people have been talking about for a long time, especially since we're seeing some movement, toward things like Elixir or Go or some of these other languages that seem to have a better story around those particular types of problems. But Ruby 3 is supposed to solve some of these, or it's supposed to have some features that make it easier or better or things like that. Do you want to talk about some of those?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've been asked once this question at the Complete Guide to Rails Performance Slack group by Nate. I'm not sure about his last name, Berkovic. So he asked me a question. So what do you think about Ruby free and by free, right? And how would it affect Action Cable and in general Ruby real-time performance? And well, let's see what are we going to have in Ruby free. What could help us? First of all, I guess when we're talking about real-time, concurrency, parallelism, everyone first thinking about guilds. That's a new concurrency model for Ruby free, which is in active development state, and well, it's not ready yet. And sometimes we hear about it as it could solve Ruby concurrency and Joule problems. But let's take a more precise look at what guild is. First, let me remind you what we have right now for what kind of concurrency primitives do we have right now in Ruby. So we have threads, and we have fibers. And if we try to draw some relation between thread and fibers, well, we can say that, well, actually each thread contains a fiber, its main fiber. And fiber is a basic primitive for concurrency in Ruby. And it allows you to execute Ruby code concurrency, but you have to manage all the switching manually. So it doesn't have anything for you, unlike threads. Threads have two main differences from fibers from concurrency perspective. They automatically release the lock, the global lock, when they hit some I/O operation, and they could also release the lock by some timing rules. So there is a scheduler for threads that could switch threads at any time. You can predict this time. That's what makes actually threading programming hard, because you don't know at what time what thread is going to be executed. And let's talk about guilds. So we're going to have guilds. Guild is a top level from the perspective of thread and fiber point of view abstraction. And actually, as for now, the current proposal says that guild will contain at least one thread, which in turn contains one fiber. So it's it's actually more close to process, but it doesn't have to copy all the memory or structures into its own. It could use shared memory, but it's closer to processes as it now, and then to threads. And what is the problem of having guild, having threads inside, and having fiber inside? Is that we're going to talk about memory, first of all, not about concurrent features. But because memory is the main problem of real-time applications in Ruby, they consume a lot of memory. And when we talk about guilds, we should consider that if guild contains a thread, and each thread in Ruby, as for now, and for 2.6 maybe it's going to change in Ruby 3. But as for now, each thread requires 1 megabyte of memory just to allocate its stack. And that means if you want to use guilds, say, the same way as we use Go routines or Erlang processes in real-time applications, and we use them to spawn an Erlang process per connection or Go routine per connection. That means that if we want to have a lot of connections in Ruby and running a guild per connection, we actually have to consume a lot of memory, 1 megabyte of RAM, just to configure a guild for a connection. And it's not the way to solve this problem. So actually, it's going to be much more memory consumption than it is now. So guilds in current version are not helpful a lot to solve this concurrency problem. That could solve forking processes problem. So we don't have to fork processes, and we can run dozens of guilds and schedule our connections between them somehow. Yeah, that will definitely be helpful, but it will not solve the main problem. There is an idea of light guilds announced by Kaiichi at RubyConf, the recent RubyConf, but that's just an idea. So the idea, well, everyone wants guilds to be more lightweight. So for now, it's not that light, right? So we have a thread inside. But maybe the architecture will change in the future, and we will have guilds as light as Golang routines on Erlang processes. And as I remember, Go routine stack size is just 2 kilobytes compared to Ruby threads 1 megabyte. So it's much less. That's why it's more efficient in terms of memory consumption.
Did you say there was some activity around trying to reduce the memory consumption per thread?
Yeah. I'm not sure what is the state of this work, but as a recent Ruby Kaigi in Japan, was a talk that proposed a dynamic stack size allocation. So it's kind of shrinking stack with as least as possible initial stack size and ability the stack to shrink in size in time. But this proposal haven't been proposed into Ruby Backtracker yet, where all the work is happening. So I'm not sure whether it's going to be in Ruby 3 or not. So whether it's just a proof of concept or it was real work on that. Yeah, that's one of the things that could make guilds more light and threads more light, actually, and could be used to improve concurrency. But this was just one talk, one proof of concept work, and haven't been published anywhere, unfortunately, yet.
So, Vlad, you had mentioned you're kind of spread from back end to front end, doing quite a bit of JavaScript front end work these days, and you had mentioned Phoenix Live View. So I'd love to kind of shift gears and pick your brain about what do you think about that in terms of the modern JavaScript stack these days and replacing it with a solution like Live View?
That's an interesting question because I haven't tried Live View. I've just talk about it, presentation and the idea, and it's interesting, but I'm not sure it's gonna happen as a standard for any popular except from the Phoenix probably world. Nowadays, front-end developers tend to build their complex applications using React and other stuff, and they want to switch to this kind of server-side rendering with pure HTML, like Live View. I don't believe in that, fortunately. I'm a kind of older JavaScript developer, so I haven't been doing JavaScript for a couple of years until recently when I'm just playing with some new things like Stimulus, by the way, and server-side with rendering with some kind of interaction with a little sprinkles of JavaScript. But as I see in our teams and among other front-end developers, they don't want to switch back to this server-side rendering plus some kind of JavaScript interaction stuff. They better build everything in the React components, and that's complex things I don't get a lot. So that could be a good idea for mostly full-stack teams focused on more back-end side, though they can do front-end quickly. But I haven't heard of such teams for a long time. So we and Itavo Martians, we do have strict division between front-end developers and back-end developers. We do not have even full stacks. That's why I haven't been doing front-end for a while. And we're definitely not going to use this kind of technology. And I'm not sure it's going to be popular, unfortunately. So modern JavaScript kind of won the war of front-end for most of the applications.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, one of the core tenets of Rails, if you look at the Rails doctrine, is it talks about how empowering small teams to compete with those larger teams where you split those responsibilities, right? It's still kind of in this full stack developer worldview of let's empower a small group to compete with these larger teams. And the server-side rendering, especially if it was piped over a WebSocket, seems like it fits right within that model of let's let this small group be incredibly productive and effective, right? So it does seem like it's going to be a niche thing, especially with everyone so heavily invested in their, whatever flavor of framework or front end or back end they want to work in, and the separation of responsibilities. But yeah, I have high hopes to keep small teams competitive
Yeah. So that's actually the idea of Rails and Ruby itself, like to build some, to try and fail maybe. It's good for a start, but the current situation, as I see it in the development world, even small teams, small startups which just starting, they heard a lot of good stuff about, they read a lot of good stuff in the internet about front-end frameworks, and they do not consider this old school approach as something to build their new applications, unfortunately. Although I also agree that it's much easier and faster to build everything in a good old way with server-side rendering. But usually it's not something that, investors and stakeholders think that it's a good idea, because eventually you have to move to front-end framework if everything works out. But so that's why I think most of people started with front-end framework from scratch. And maybe some of them regret about it, but we don't know about it.
Yeah, for that to be viable, it's got to have a good solution like early or any cable or Phoenix. Somebody's got, or Golang, some back-end technology that has a great story around parallelism and concurrency.
Another thing here that, why I'm working on front-end side right now. So we are working on admin functionality for our application. So it's not something like user-facing, but we want to build something fast and mostly with the help of back-end developers. So we were initially looking for server-side rendering in some UI framework, kind of a set of components, CSS, to start with, not to bother with even with CSS. And it turned out that most of the UI frameworks nowadays, they are built for some particular front-end framework or library. Most of them are React-based or Vue-based or Angular-based. And you cannot find anything good for you just to write good old HTML and CSS. You have to add this kind of framework. This kind of force you to use framework if you want, even for this simple cases. Now that's kind of surprised me. So I ended up with adding some Vue-based framework because it's much simpler than anything else. But it turned out that it's dozens of solutions for framework-based UI, and only a few for just a pure HTML and CSS. And that's kind of just cycling the problem. So we cannot just easily build HTML-based solution projects with something who's ready to go UI frameworks. We have to choose some JavaScript tool for that too.
You mentioned you'd been experimenting with Stimulus. How has that been in comparison?
Yeah, well, Stimulus reminds me my own framework I've built before I started working on Ill Martians. So I was kind of a full stack developer, and for a long time, only developer on this project. And the idea of Stimulus, so kind of adding some HTML attributes and may add some interaction to your HTML. Actually, it's not new. So it's built with new technologies like Mutation Observer, which is used by Stimulus. It's really good. Those days when I was working on JavaScript, there were not such thing. So we have to reinvent some other ways to do that. But actually, I like the idea of making some parts of HTML more interactive. And the Stimulus doing this right and good. And it was really easy to set up and run it. And I like it, so I'm continuing to using it. Maybe I'm gonna add turbolinks. I'm not sure. Never used them. So
+1 for turbolinks. I'm a fan of turbolinks.
I don't know. I think the time I started working on Rails, turbolinks were something. The thing that can break anything unexpectedly, and I just turned off every time I used it because I didn't want to learn turbolinks, to be honest. And that was about turbolinks 2, I think. Not that good as turbolinks 5. And now I'm thinking about adding turbolinks back to the stack and finally learn how to use turbolinks and being afraid of it.
That's the interesting thing about turbolinks is I think it was kind of a marketing fail because it came on turned on default in Rails. Everyone just had the expectation that it would just work. But you have to invest. You have to invest just as much time, or well, I shouldn't say just as much, but you do have to invest time to learn how to use it and how to use it properly. Right? It's not just a turn it on and everything's magic. You have to invest a little bit of time to understand the tool and learn it, which is interesting because you see all these other developers will move to a stack like React, and they have this understanding, well, that's going to be a long process. We're investing a year of our team's time to go learn this. We're going to send them to training and do all these things to learn this stack. Yet TurboLinks is expected to just work without any investment from the developer. Right? But I think that's a marketing fail from how it was pitched early on.
Yeah, I think we didn't have any good, guide or how-to for TurboLinks. And we had a lot of Stack Overflow and other resources questions about TurboLinks with answers just remove TurboLinks. That's a bad reputation, unfortunately.
Well, anything else we want to jump on as far as any cable, action cable, performance, real-time, concurrency, buzzword?
Yeah, I think if we'd like to continue Ruby free topic, there is two actually things I'd like to mention. So we considered guilds, and as I see right now, guilds are not suitable for concurrency, and then not meant to be. But there is one more thing in this party of guild, thread, and fiber, which don't have a final name actually, but we can call it autofiber or threadlet. It's something in between fiber and thread, and the difference is that it's like a fiber, but it switches automatically on I/O. So it doesn't have a scheduler. It's cannot switch on time like thread and unexpectedly, but it's much lightweight, so it's like a fiber, so it's not a thread, and it's a good primitive for building concurrent applications. And an example of usage of this pattern is as a family of tools from Socketry. I know it's an organization, a company, whatever. So it's a GitHub organization called Socketry. And they had a bunch of libraries. The core library is called Async. And some Async like adapters for different things like database adapters, WebSocket implementation. And they have their own web server called Falcon. And it's based on top of fibers. Probably heard about this. It's pretty popular blog post from the recent 2 weeks called, I don't remember the topic. There were a lot of actually posts regarding fibers recently, but one which mentions how we can build web servers using fibers more efficiently. And they have some benchmarks for HTTP, which looks really good, and they use their own implementation of Autofiber, they fork of Ruby. It haven't been merged yet, but I think it's going to be in the next version, 2.7, because the work is almost done, and I hope it's going to be merged. And Autofiber is actually what we're going to use in the future, as I think, for real-time and concurrency in Ruby. So to finish this concurrency in Ruby free part of this show, I think it's how I see the real-time application, concurrent application, and Ruby free. So it's a combination of guilds for parallelism, so for using as much CPU resources as possible, so to utilize all your resources from the one process, and Autofibers to handle concurrent actors, let's call it like this. But that's going to be, well, in 2020, maybe. At the end of 2020, actually, as Matt said recently. And another thing not related to concurrency, but related to heavy memory usage of real-time applications. So I already told that, for example, Action Cable and our other existing solutions, as I see, they use persistent long-lived objects to store connection state. So just your connection object, an action instance from the Ruby perspective, is a long-lived object which is not dying fast, unlike a request response cycle when you just all the object lives in the terms of this request response. And what the problem with this? The problem is that it's just like my hypothesis. It haven't been proved yet, but I have some small amount of time to benchmark this stuff. But as I see, when you run an action cable application for a long time with a medium level stress, so not hundreds of thousands, but maybe thousands of connections, connecting, disconnecting, some live minutes, some live seconds, and so on. And if you take a look at your memory after running this kind of test, you can see that it's really, really high fragmented. So there is memory fragmentation issue related to this long-lived objects, because Ruby generational garbage collector relies on generational hypothesis, like in many other runtimes languages where generational garbage collection is used, which says that most objects die young. That means that if an object survived as, I don't remember, 3 or 4 cycles in Ruby, it's moved into mature part of heap. I don't remember the name of it. So where all the objects live, and it's assumed that these all objects likely not gonna be freed at any time. That's why a garbage collector doesn't try to check them at every cycle. And that means that long-lived objects, when they die, they are not young objects, they're old objects. And we do not free this memory from Ruby heap immediately or as fast as it could be, only on the major cycles. And that produces these gaps in memory heap, which from the other side leads to memory blow, because Ruby need to allocate more memory pages because it thinks that these memory slots are still occupied, but actually they're not. That's just my hypothesis. And related to Ruby Free, probably everyone heard about work of Aaron Patterson on compacting GC, which could solve this issue and free this memory and compact memory and produce more space for new objects. And maybe I'm not sure about it. So this kind of, it's not the stuff I'm very familiar with. So this memory management in Ruby, but that's just a suggestion how Ruby Free could improve this situation.
Cool.
So yeah, I think that's most of the thing about Ruby Free, and that's what it's going to be in 2 years. So we'll see.
Nice. Anything else, gang? Anything else we should talk about? All right, let's go ahead and do some picks. Before we do that, though, Vlad, how do people find you online? You blog somewhere?
Yeah. So I think the easiest way is to GitHub. My handle is Palkan, Palkan, and almost the same handle on Twitter. It's Palkan_Tula, Tula. And the same handle on Dev2 when I'm trying to write some short posts. But from time to time, I actually get a backlog of posts to write, but haven't had time. And I'm writing in our Evil Martians blog most of the time. So all the big stuff is going to Evil Martians blog. So you can check it and find me there. And if you're in New York City or around, you can find me in Brooklyn. I'll be glad to discuss it, anything actually, live.
Nice. All right, well, let's go ahead and do some picks. Is your job search stuck? Maybe you're not getting any interviews with employers, or maybe you are, but no job offers. Or you may be new and not even know where to start. This is Charles Max Wood, and I'm releasing a new course and ebook on how to find a job as a software developer. The course walks you through the process of finding the types of companies you want to work for, getting their attention, and putting your best foot forward as the candidate they want. I've coached dozens of developers in looking for jobs and have been able to help several people find jobs within 2 weeks to 2 months. So whether you're new to development, can't find a great job that fits what you want, or are looking for remote work from an area without a strong tech community, I can help. Go to getacoderjob.com and sign up today. Dave, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah, sure. I have one pick. So I'm really peculiar about cleaning my car. And the one thing that I hate about cleaning my car more than any is doing the windshield, because it's just very awkward to try up there to reach and clean the inside. So I got one of those like as seen on TV things. And it's like the first time I've ever bought one and actually liked the product. So it is the invisible glass. And it's basically just like a little duster, those little French duster things, but it has a little pad that you attach on instead. And it gives you that really nice reach to get the full windshield. So it's like $14 and it, makes me want to clean the inside of my windshield so I can see at night.
Nice. Eric, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah, I just got one. The only pick that I have today is a set of headphones that my wife bought me from Costco. And these headphones are Bose Quiet Comfort, not 2, but 1. And the Quiet Comfort 2 is pretty dang nice because it's got Alexa built in, but are over ear. They don't bother your ears at all. And they are for connecting to multiple devices, so I can have it connected to both my phone and my computer at a time. And it is an extremely well-made machine that does noise cancellation. So I've been very impressed with them. Yeah, I got it at Costco, so that's my pick.
I have to second that. Those are really nice.
Yeah, I actually got the exact same ones that I think Nate has had for quite a while.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
Yeah, Nate has all the cool toys, right? Nate, do you have some picks for us?
I do. I've got 2 picks, just because we touched on it today. If folks haven't read the Rails Doctrine, I highly recommend going there and just kind of seeing what values the Rails core team is promoting with the framework and what the goals of the framework are. Essentially, empowering. Long story short, it's about empowering small teams, but it's a fantastic read. I remember as a consultant, I was actually reprimanded at one point because I completed the a contract that they anticipated would last for 6 months. I finished it in 2 weeks because I used Rails, and I was reprimanded that I could not finish my work that quickly. Just due to the long sales cycle. But no, and for me, that's a testament to kind of the goals of the project. And so I would recommend that read. And the other one is, if you enjoy plays, there's a version of Newsies on Netflix it's a Broadway production of Newsies, and it's absolutely fantastic. And those are mine.
Nice. All right, I'm going to jump in here with a few picks. Yeah, I think what I'm going to pick this time, so there are a couple of things. One is if you want to hear me talk about like how I'm building devchat.tv every week, you can go to entreprogrammers.com. It's like the blend of entrepreneurs and programmers. Anyway, if you're having trouble spelling it, that's why I'm spelling that out. But anyway, so we decided to do a challenge this last week. And basically the challenge was to get 8 Pomodoros done before noon every day this week. And we put a little bit of money on the line too. So any day that you miss that, you have to fork over $25, the other guys. Anyway, I didn't want to have to explain to my wife why I was giving $100 to my friends. So I've been doing it, and I'm pretty tired because like today we record Ruby Rogues at 10, Elixir Mix at 11:30. And so I had to get the Pomodoros done before we started recording today. And so I got up at 4 a.m. this morning and did it. And so, yeah, anyway, so yeah, you can imagine I'm a little bit tired, but the flip side of it is that it's just so nice to get stuff done. The tool that I've been using, so I'm going to pick the Pomodoro technique, and then I'm also going to pick, there's a tool, it's called Kanban Flow. And as you can probably guess, it's a Kanban tool. It's kind of like Trello, but it's got a built-in Pomodoro timer. And I've been using a technique that was put together by my friend who's also on Entreprogrammers, John Sanmez. And I'll put a link to his video. But he basically spells out, so he has a column for each day of the week. And then he basically puts in what he's going to get done that day. And then he just makes sure that he runs enough Pomodoros against those things to feel good about it. And anyway, that's been really, really helpful for me. So I'm going to pick that. And then I also just want to remind people that we are doing a webinar about mastermind groups. And we're going to be doing that on January 3rd. If you go to mastermindhunt.com/devchat, you can get in on that. Essentially what we're going to be talking about, because mastermind groups are usually focused around business, but these are focused around helping each other stay current and train and learn and all that stuff. So anyway, just going to throw all that stuff out there, I guess. Vlad, what are your picks?
Oh, okay. I think I'd like to mention just one thing. It's Advent of Code competition or whatever. So I just started to take part in it this weekend, and I'm trying to sew these puddles with Rust and Ruby along to each other, just to compare how it's going to look like in two different languages. I haven't tried this before, but it looks very interesting idea. So
yeah, I was disappointed I missed Advent of Code last year, and I need to put these things on my calendar to check them out before they start again, because I'm missing it again. Go figure. It's like NaNoWriMo, right? I was in the middle of writing my nonfiction book, and it was like, So NaNoWriMo is going to be January for me, I guess. But yeah, anyway, thanks for coming, Vlad.
Thank you for having me. I was glad to be here.
Yeah, it was fun to chat, fun to talk about, and I'd love to get you back and talk about the structure of gems and how you approach that stuff.
Sure, anytime you want.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and we will catch everybody next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.